Have you ever felt powerless in a difficult situation, where the right words could change everything? Abigail, an ordinary woman, faced such a moment. Married to a senseless and despicable man, she found herself in the middle of a conflict that could destroy her family and her life. But with wisdom, courage and faith, she stood up and did what seemed impossible. Her story is not only about challenges, but about how acting with wisdom and confidence can transform even the darkest moments. If you have ever been in situations where there seemed to be no way out, get ready to discover how Abigail's courage can inspire the solution you so desperately need. Her story could be the key to your own transformation. Before we begin, if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss any inspiring stories like this one. Here, you will find powerful stories and teachings that can transform your life. Let's discover together the legacy of characters like Abigail and many others. Don't miss it. Abigail was a remarkable woman, known for both her beauty and her rare wisdom. She lived in Carmel, a wealthy region of Israel, where her husband, Nabal, was a very wealthy man with a difficult character. Nabal was arrogant, rude, and foolish, and his actions often caused trouble. Meanwhile, Abigail stood out for her intelligence and common sense, traits that were rare at the time. Despite living in a male-dominated society where women were often undervalued, Abigail did not limit herself to the traditional role of a wife. She possessed a unique ability to act with prudence and discernment, and her wisdom earned her the respect of all who knew her. In addition to her outward beauty, Abigail had an inner strength that made her shine in the midst of adversity. Her wisdom and serenity made her an important figure, capable of facing challenges with grace and wisdom. She was about to be placed before a great test, where her qualities would be fundamental in saving her family and averting an impending disaster. Nabal was a very wealthy man, but his character left much to be desired. He lived in Carmel, a prosperous region of Israel, where he owned vast flocks of sheep and goats. Although he was a wealthy man with fertile land and many possessions, Nabal had a reputation that preceded him, and it was not a good one. He was known for his hardness of heart and arrogance, traits that made him extremely difficult to get along with. The Bible describes him as a man of evil character and hard and evil, someone who had no compassion for others or regard for what was right. His behavior was selfish and he often made impulsive decisions without thinking about the consequences, especially when it came to how he treated the people around him. He was not the type of man to show gratitude or empathy. On the contrary, he felt that his wealth placed him above others, and this was reflected in the way he acted and spoke. Nabal's difficult character was made clear in a specific episode involving David, the future king of Israel. David and his men were taking refuge near Nabal's land, fleeing from King Saul, who was pursuing them. During this time, David and his men protected Nabal's property, ensuring that his flocks would not be stolen by bandits or marauders. They cared for Nabal's sheep and goats, offering a kind of silent protection, asking nothing in return. David then sent messengers to Nabal, asking for a small donation, a token of gratitude for his services. He simply asked for food and resources for himself and his men, who were in need. But Nabal's response was dismissive and rude. He completely ignored the good deed of David and his men. Instead of acknowledging the favor that had been done to him, Nabal responded with words of contempt. He questioned who David was and scoffed at the idea of helping him. His response was full of arrogance and indifference, as if, because he was rich, he was above any moral responsibility to others. Nabal had no interest in showing gratitude, and this deeply angered David and his men, who expected something very different from someone so wealthy and, supposedly, influential. This episode reveals a lot about Nabal's character. He was selfish, insensitive, and incapable of recognizing the value of good deeds. His response was not only cruel, but also showed a great lack of wisdom. Nabal did not know how to handle generosity, and this ended up putting his life and that of his family in danger. He was the kind of person who felt entitled to do whatever he wanted, without caring about the consequences for others. It was this type of problematic character that Abigail, his wife, had to deal with every day. While Nabal lived his life surrounded by possessions and with an attitude of disdain, Abigail was forced to balance the tensions caused by her husband's actions, always seeking wisdom to deal with the challenges that arose due to his destructive nature. She, unlike Nabal, was far from arrogant or insensitive. On the contrary, she possessed the wisdom and grace needed to deal with the difficult situations that Nabal's behavior often created. When David received Nabal's arrogant response, his anger was immediate and intense. He felt deeply disrespected, especially after having protected Nabal's land without asking for anything in return. David could not understand how someone so rich and powerful could be so ungrateful. His heart was filled with fury, and he decided that the only way to deal with the offense was with revenge. David gathered 400 of his men and began marching toward Carmel. He was determined to bring justice and punish Nabal and his family for the insult. David swore that not one of Nabal's men would escape, and his anger was about to lead to tragedy. David's decision was impulsive and filled with emotion. He wanted to repay evil for evil, without thinking about the consequences of his actions. His fury was about to take an irreversible turn, but as we will see, Abigail's intervention would prevent him from making a serious mistake. What would you do if you were in David's shoes? When he received Nabal's arrogant response, anger took over him, and he was ready to take justice into his own hands. But is revenge always the solution? We want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts on David's attitude and how anger can lead us to make impulsive decisions. Let's talk about how we can learn to better manage our emotions. Abigail's intervention, as David prepared to march out with his 400 men, determined to punish Nabal for his outrage. One person learned of the impending danger and made a crucial decision. Nabal's wife Abigail soon learned of the situation from one of her servants. The worried servant ran to her and told her everything that had happened, how David and his men had protected his property, and how Nabal, in his arrogance, had responded with cruel and disrespectful words. The servant feared that David, in a rage, would attack Nabal's house and destroy everything. Abigail knew that if David and his men did attack, it would be a tragedy for her family and everyone around her. She also knew the kind of man she was married to, and she could not allow Nabal's foolishness to cause a major catastrophe. Without hesitation, Abigail acted quickly, taking charge of the situation. She got up, gathered a large amount of food, bread, wine, meat, dried figs, and grain, and prepared a generous gift for David. She knew that if she could reach David before he reached her home, she could prevent bloodshed. Abigail did not tell Nabal what she was doing, perhaps because she knew that he, in his anger, would not understand her decision and would probably stop her actions. With the gift in hand, Abigail quickly set off toward the place where David and his men were approaching. She was not afraid to face an army of men, because she knew that her mission was more important than any physical obstacle. Above all, she wanted to prevent destruction and protect her family. If you are enjoying this story and see how it can teach us important lessons of wisdom and patience, please leave a like now. This helps us know that you are enjoying the content and motivates us to bring you more inspiring stories like this. Don't forget to leave a like and keep following. When Abigail finally saw David, she did not hesitate. She got off her donkey, prostrated herself before him, and humbly threw herself at David's feet. She did not try to justify her husband's behavior, but rather took responsibility for Nabal's thoughtless words. With great wisdom, Abigail spoke, "Please do not hold my husband Nabal accountable, for he is a fool, and his heart is like his name." Abigail spoke with such grace and wisdom that David was touched. She did not attack Nabal directly, but she acknowledged his mistake, and more importantly, she showed David that he did not need to get his hands dirty with blood to seek revenge. She acknowledged David as the future king of Israel, and in her speech she made sure to affirm that David's victory would come from God, not from impulsive acts of violence. She then offered the gifts as a sign of her goodwill and respect. She humbly asked David to accept what she was offering and spare her home and family. Abigail was, in effect, interceding for everyone, including Nabal himself, who, despite his foolishness, was not entirely responsible for everything. David, upon hearing Abigail's words, was deeply touched by her wisdom. He recognized that this was an act of God, who had kept him from making a terrible mistake. David thanked Abigail, praising her courage and discernment. He said, "Blessed be your understanding, and blessed be you, who has kept me from shedding blood and from taking revenge with my own hands." Abigail, through her wisdom and quick action, had managed to avert the disaster that seemed imminent. Her intervention not only saved her home, but also prevented David from making a mistake that he would perhaps regret for the rest of his life. David, touched by Abigail's grace and humility, accepted her gifts and decided to return to his journey, sparing Nabal and his family from that tragedy. It was a pivotal moment in Abigail's story, one that demonstrated that with wisdom, courage, and decisive action, she could change the course of events and bring peace where before there had been only anger and revenge. After Abigail's intervention, when David spared the lives of Nabal and his family, peace seemed to be restored. Abigail returned home, relieved that disaster had been averted. However, Nabal was still unaware of the momentous decision his wife had made to save his life. When she returned and told him all that had happened, and how she had interceded for him and averted David's wrath, Nabal's reaction was nothing short of disturbing. Nabal was furious to learn that Abigail had acted without his permission. He was a proud and selfish man, incapable of recognizing his wife's wisdom or the seriousness of the situation. When Abigail told him of David's generosity and forgiveness, he was so distraught that he suffered an emotional shock. The Bible describes Nabal as being as a stone and having a temporary paralysis, possibly a stroke, as the emotion had overcome him. 10 days after this event, Nabal died. His death was not an immediate event, but a result of his harsh reaction to the crisis he had created. Nabal's heart was shaken by the anguish and folly of his actions, and his health could not bear the weight of the consequences of his selfish behavior. When David heard of Nabal's death, he recognized that it was God who had brought this end to the foolish man. In his reaction, David did not rejoice in Nabal's death, but saw divine justice in it. He understood that God had dealt justly with Nabal, considering the arrogance and contempt he had shown not only toward David but toward others throughout his life. Then David remembered Abigail. She had shown wisdom and courage, and now, upon seeing Nabal's death, David knew that she was free for a new life. He sent his messengers to ask Abigail to marry him. David recognized in her a woman of extraordinary character who did not deserve to live among a man like Nabal. Abigail, upon receiving the news of her husband's death, did not hesitate. She knew that this was an opportunity for a new beginning, and humbly accepted David's request. Her life, which had previously seemed marked by Nabal's foolishness, now opened up to a future of hope and dignity with a man who respected and valued her. Abigail's legacy goes beyond her wisdom and beauty. She is remembered as a woman of courage, discernment, and faith. Her wisdom prevented David from making a fatal mistake, saving lives and showing the importance of trusting in God's justice. Abigail did not act out of revenge, but out of divine wisdom, trusting that God would handle the situation justly. By marrying David, Abigail not only became his wife, but also a source of support and counsel throughout his reign. Her influence was quiet but significant, helping David make wise decisions during the challenges of his rule. Furthermore, Abigail's legacy is seen in her son, Chilib, who would become part of David's royal line. His lineage was linked to the fulfillment of God's promises of an eternal reign. Abigail also teaches us that even in difficult circumstances, one person with wisdom and faith can change the course of history. Her life exemplifies how God can use anyone, regardless of position or wealth, to accomplish his plans. Abigail's legacy inspires us to act with wisdom and humility, always trusting in the divine plan. Now that you know Abigail's story, we want to know what you think. What lessons did you learn from her courage and wisdom? Have you ever been in situations where you had to make difficult decisions like she did? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts. Let's talk and learn together from the example of this incredible woman. And so, Abigail's story shows us that even in the most difficult situations, there is always a choice, to respond wisely or to let anger and fear take over. Abigail teaches us that with courage, trust in God, and wisdom, we can change the course of our lives and the lives of others around us. She not only saved her family, but she also became an example of faith and intelligence for all of us. If you have ever found yourself facing challenges and felt like there was no way out, remember Abigail. She used what she had, wisdom and faith, to turn a desperate situation into an opportunity for change. And just like her, you too can make a difference. Never underestimate the power of wisdom, patience, and trusting that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light that can guide us. May Abigail's story inspire you to act with courage, wisdom, and faith, no matter what you are facing. Remember, you have the power within you to change your story. If Abigail's story touched your heart and inspired you to act with more wisdom and faith, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, you will find more powerful stories that can transform your outlook on life and help you face any challenge with confidence. Subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss any stories that can make a difference in your path. Let's learn together to change our stories.